As we mentioned earlier, commandbox is basically the equivalent of Node.js, but for the ColdFusion community. Node provides several huge benefits for the JavaScript development world. With Node, JavaScript developers are able to run JavaScript at the command line, write scripts to run on their development laptops, install numerous third-party tools to make building JavaScript apps easier, and much more. In addition to that, Node comes with NPM, the Node Package Manager. NPM provides a place in the cloud known as the NPM registry, where JavaScript developers can store, share, and use libraries written by other JavaScript developers from all over the world. Node really has become a game changer for JavaScript development in recent years, and it's one of the tools that helped propel JavaScript forward so much in recent years. You, as ColdFusion developers, have all of those same benefits available to you through commandbox. Commandbox is the CFML and ColdFusion answer to Node.js. Commandbox works the exact same way as Node. It's a self-contained application you install on your machine, and it provides you with a very complementary set of benefits to that of Node and NPM. For clarity, Node and the NPM registry are separate things. Node is the command line tool you use on your laptop or server. It's a handful of commands really, but we don't need to get pedantic about it. And the NPM registry is basically a web server on which developers all over the world can share and download a wide variety of JavaScript libraries. Just like Node and commandbox are equivalents, we have the equivalent of NPM with ColdFusion development. That's the ForgeBox registry, forgebox.io. We'll get into ForgeBox in more detail later, but for now, let's look at some of the basics of commandbox. You can install commandbox by going to the ortussolutions.com website, clicking on the product menu, and selecting commandbox. On the right-hand side of that page, click the download button or simply scroll down to the download section. As you can see here, commandbox is available for Windows, Mac, and some flavors of Linux. Notice that there are two sets of download links labeled No JRE included and With JRE included. JRE is the Java runtime environment. Commandbox needs a copy of the JRE either in the same folder as commandbox or in the system path. If you've already got the JRE installed and available in your system path, you can download the No JRE included version. If you don't have a JRE or you're just not sure, you can download the With JRE included version. Personally, I usually go with the JRE included version just so I don't have to think about it too much or worry about other configuration changes that might happen elsewhere on my laptop. I keep all of my commandbox related stuff in one folder together, including the JRE. Technically, you can run commandbox from any folder on your machine, but it works best from a folder in your system path. The idea is you want to be able to run box commands from any directory on your machine without having to do any extra configuration each time. I'm running Mac OS X, and I put commandbox and the JRE in the user local bin folder. You can see that by typing the command which box. And there it says user local bin. Box is the file that we will be using anytime we type box space and then some command on this machine. That usually works pretty well and doesn't require any additional steps later when you're using commandbox for your different projects. To start using commandbox, open a terminal window like I have here and simply type box. You should see the commandbox ASCII logo appear on the screen with a bit of additional info about the version of commandbox you have installed and maybe a few other things such as a random quote below the logo. Okay, so we know commandbox works. Let's type exit. That should kick you back out to the terminal prompt from your operating system. And I'm using Mac, but this will work the exact same way on Windows and Linux. If you put commandbox in the system path like we discussed earlier, you should be able to use it from any folder on your computer. So this time I've got a terminal window open and we've made a folder called Vandelay Forum for our project. In this video series, we're going to build a message board forum app for the fictional company Vandelay Industries. For the upcoming videos, we'll be spending the majority of our time working on various features in this application. As you can see right now, it's just an empty folder, so let's fix that. Since we're learning Coldbox, our Vandelay Forums app should be a Coldbox application. I can of course go to the Ortus website or the GitHub repository, download the latest Coldbox zip file, install Coldbox myself, and I'll need to remember to put it in the Coldbox directory. I'll also need to make a folder for my app, set up some controllers and views, and of course a few other things that I would do when starting to scaffold out a new Coldbox application. Or, with commandbox, I can do this. Type box to start up our command box shell, and once that's running, we will do commandbox create app. We wait a few moments. Commandbox goes out to the ForgeBox registry, downloads the latest version of commandbox, unzips it, installs it, and sets up a skeleton of our application. So just by typing commandbox create app, we get the latest version of commandbox, and we get testbox automatically installed and configured in our application too. And we didn't have to do anything except type commandbox create app. Thinking back to Node.js for a second here, you can tell when a JavaScript app uses the Node ecosystem because it has a package.json file along with the code. You've probably seen these in other open source projects before. They're pretty common. Package.json describes the project name, author, the version number, some keywords about the project, and other libraries it depends on in order to get running properly, among several other things. Within the ForgeBox commandbox ecosystem, CFML developers have a similar file, box.json. It does basically the same things that a package.json file does for JavaScript developers, except this one is tailored for CFML and ForgeBox. The commandbox create app command also created this box.json file for us. It populated it with some default information and added the file to our project. As you can see, we also got a favicon, robots.txt file, a default readme, and everything else we'd want when starting to build a new commandbox application. And you don't have to type a single thing besides commandbox create app to get all of these files automatically generated for you. That's great, but we still need to install and configure a CFML server, right? If you've ever installed either Adobe ColdFusion or Lucy before, you know that it can be kind of a tedious process. Another benefit to commandbox is we now have a much more streamlined way to install whichever CFML server we need. It's really easy, and we'll show you how to do that now. So we need to go out to the Adobe or Lucy website and download a CFML server, install and configure that before we can use our app. That could take a little while for us to set up. Or we can do it the commandbox way and do this, server start. And with that command, commandbox will again go out to the web, specifically ForgeBox, grab a CFML server for us, download the jar, and get everything set up and configured automatically. And it will even start running that server for us within our Vandelay forum folder as the web root. That's it. Seriously, you don't have to manually install Adobe ColdFusion or Lucy ever again. The first time you run this, commandbox has to go out to the internet and download the server jar file. But every time after that, it will use the cached local version of that jar on your laptop to start the server. So future starts will run faster than this first one did. By default, that server start command will grab a default version of Lucy as your CFML engine. Currently, that's probably Lucy 5.2, maybe 5.3 by the time this video is out. Now, let's say you want to use Adobe ColdFusion instead. Normally, you'd have to go through manually uninstalling Lucy, downloading Adobe CF, running that installer, completing the installation, completing the configuration steps all over again. This is all another big time suck. With commandbox, we simply do this. Server stop. We do server stop to shut down our Lucy server. And next we'll type server start space CF engine equals Adobe. And just by using the CF engine equals Adobe part, we can switch from Lucy and run Adobe CF instead. Just like with the Lucy default, this will grab the latest version of ACF and will set up a developer edition for us on our laptop, again without ever having to mess with the installer. And if you have a registered serial number, you can add that to the server and use commandbox to manage your production servers and your serial numbers as well. But that's going to be on the scope of these videos, so we're not going to cover that this time. So obviously, you can use this to switch between Lucy and Adobe CF as needed. What about if you want to switch between, say, Adobe ColdFusion 2018 and 2016 to test if your app works okay on different versions? In case you have different servers, maybe in your QA department versus production or things like that, maybe different teams within your company have different versions of ColdFusion they have to maintain, things of that nature you want to deal with. Or maybe you just want to test that your code runs okay on the new version before you upgrade a production server. You can also switch between not just Lucy and Adobe CF, but within each of those, Lucy or Adobe, you can control which major version of that tool you install, meaning you can run Adobe ColdFusion 2016 or ColdFusion 2018. You can also tell it which specific patches you want to use within there. So maybe I want to run Adobe ColdFusion 2016 with the 0.05 security patch applied. I can do all of those things all from the command box command line without ever having to go out to the Adobe or Lucy website and manually download security updates. It's all handled for you by command box behind the scenes, grabbing those things out of the registry without you ever having to do anything. So here you can see we're still installing our Adobe CF engine. That's just going to take a few moments to download and set up because it's a rather large jar file we have to grab off of the web. It's now installing that from, you can see, the ForgeBox registry. And once that's up and running, I'll show you some of the basic commands for switching between, say, Lucy and Adobe, and also switching between different specific point versions of each of those tools. Here we go. Now you can see we're running our Apple startup as soon as the Adobe ColdFusion engine has finished loading. And there it is. Here's the version of our app that we ran previously on Lucy, and here's the version of it running on ColdBox, the exact same port number, the exact same everything. Back here in our command prompt, we can take a look at the menu that you get from commandbox that will show you information about the server where your web root is at, the URL to get to your homepage of that application you're working on. It even shows you the engine that you're using. Here, Adobe 2018 with this specific point release patch set security update numbering system right there for you. Let's say I don't want to use Adobe 2018. I want to switch and use Adobe 2016. I can go back here to command box, and instead of doing CF engine equals Adobe, I can do CF engine equals Adobe at 2016. And now it's going to go out to the ForgeBox registry again. This time it will grab Adobe ColdFusion 2016. I just have to turn off that engine that I'm currently running. Server stop. It'll shut down my currently running Adobe 2018 server. And then it will go out to the web and grab our 2016 jar file for us. It'll automatically start that same installation process like it did before. And again, notice how I'm never going into the actual Adobe or Lucy installers when doing these processes. In the last 5 minutes, we've installed Lucy 5, ColdFusion 2018, uninstalled ColdFusion 2018, and now we're installing ColdFusion 2016 to make sure that our code works on that version of it as well. I haven't had to touch a single installer in that entire process. I've typed a couple of things from the command line. Command box takes care of the rest for us, goes out to the web, grabs everything, and that's it. Okay, and here is our application running on Adobe ColdFusion 2016, all from that command line command that we typed earlier, CF engine equals Adobe at 2016. I can also do things like this, ColdFusion 16.0.05, or I could even do things like this, CF engine equals Lucy at 5.2.7. Testing your code on different patch versions of your server has never been easier. Testing your code across different CFML engines has never been easier either. So now we know how to update the version of Lucy or Adobe CF that we're running. What if a new version of ColdBox comes out that we want to apply to our existing application? Or a new version of TestBox, or one of the other related dependencies that our project uses? That also used to be a manual process, right? Download a zip file, unpack it, copy the files into your app, and it probably meant following some sort of tedious steps in a README file to update a config setting or some other such thing. Now with commandbox, let's say you want to update the version of ColdBox that your application uses. Rather than doing that tedious process of downloading a zip, following a README, and so on, you simply type update ColdBox. And that's it. Commandbox will go out to the ForgeBox registry again like it did before. This time, instead of just blindly installing ColdBox, it will look at our Vandelay forum folder, check which version of ColdBox we're running, then it will compare that version to the latest one available in ForgeBox. And if there is a newer version available, commandbox will download and apply that to our application. again with no manual steps needed by us. Want to do the same thing for, say, testbox or CBORM? It works the same way. We have testbox in our current application, so if I wanted to, I could just say update testbox, or I could say update CBORM. Any package you have installed in your application can be updated this way. So how does it know which version we have installed? When we ran the commandbox create app command, one of the files that got created for us during that process is that box.json file that I mentioned earlier. If you're familiar with Node and JavaScript, you've probably already seen the package.json files like I mentioned before. That file lists all the various libraries that get used in your JS applications, including which version numbers of each, and a few other bits of data about your project. In commandbox, we have the box.json file, and it works the same way. So here in our file, you'll see two sections, dependencies and dev dependencies. These list out packages that our project depends on, and next to the name of each package is the version number. So when you type update and a package name, this is the version number we have installed currently, and that's what gets checked against ForgeBox to see if there's a newer one available. Here it says I'm running commandbox 5. Let's say, for example, commandbox 6 gets released next week, and I want to install that. I type upgrade commandbox, wait a few minutes, and version 6 will be copied down into my app. The version number in my box.json file will be automatically updated to 6 as well, and we're all set. Now, let's examine that a bit more closely. Let's say that this is the update that I want to do, go from version 5 to version 6. That's what we'd call a major version number upgrade. That first digit all the way to the left of the version number, that's the major version. When those change, that usually means there was a breaking change made in that library, and our application is not guaranteed to run as is. We may very well have to go back and run some tests in our code before deploying commandbox 6 to production with our application. We'll get into testing code, writing tests, and things like that later, but for now the takeaway here is this. Just because you can type update and some package name, and just because the new library does get copied down and installed into your app, that does not mean it's 100% compatible as is with your code. So just be careful when updating packages and pay attention to the version numbers in them when doing so. Take a look at the commandbox setting in my box.json file. See how it doesn't just say 5.0.0, but it has that caret in front of the 5? The version numbers we're using in the box.json file are following a standard called semantic versioning, or SEMVAR for short. Basically, it's a format that says the version numbers will be 3 numbers separated by decimal points between them like this. Left to right, they are major version, minor version, and patch. Without getting into too many details, they basically work like this. When the patch number changes, we got a bug fix or 2, maybe 3. When the minor version changes, the number in the middle, we got some new functionality, but everything is still compatible with whatever the previous version number was. When a major version number changes, we're making bigger changes to the core application here, and the code is not guaranteed to be compatible with the old one. These will be breaking changes that need to be handled more carefully. That caret operator in front of the version number is SEMVAR's way of saying, when we do an upgrade to this package, don't upgrade past the major version number we have here, in this case version 5. So for example, if commandbox 5.1 or 5.2 came out, update commandbox will update our application to use them. If commandbox 5.11 or 5.87 come out, same thing. It will update our application, no problem. But if commandbox 6 comes out, update commandbox won't do anything. We'll get the latest 5. Whatever version number, but anything in the 6.1, 6.2, 6. Whatever versioning scheme of the application, that will not be applied to our code. For that to happen, we'd have to update that caret 5 to be caret 6, and then do the update command afterward. Now let's go back to our running demo application Vandelay Forum for a minute. I switched the code back to running Lucy 5 and started our application up again using server start cfengine equals Lucy, like you can see on the screen here. That's the same server start command from before. Now that our commandbox app is up and running, let's look at some other related commands that are handy to know. First, there's commandbox reinit. Commandbox apps, and really any app that uses a modern MVC framework, often caches a lot of things in memory to make the apps run as fast as possible. Sometimes we need to clear that cache and reload the framework and start our app over again from scratch. With a commandbox app, you've got 2 ways to do that. One is you can go to the URL and you can simply add $fw reinit equals 1. At the end of your URL, that'll work on any URL in your web application. The other way you can do that is you can simply go to your command box command line and type commandbox reinit, and that will do the same thing as the fw reinit equals 1 in the URL. No difference either way, it's just another way to reload your application. If you're a command line person, it might be more comfortable to do it here as part of your workflow rather than changing it in the URL. Personally, I like running server things from a command prompt like this, as the URL often has several other items in the query string and typos can be easier to spot in a short command line instruction like this versus in the URL in my web browser. But that's just my personal preference. There's also the help command. We've seen the server commands before, server start, server stop, and the commandbox command, commandbox create app, and so on. And each of them have various items within each namespace that they can do. Server can do stop and start, like I just mentioned. Commandbox can create app and reinit, several other things as well. You get the idea. There are many commands and namespaces within commandbox, and commandbox itself actually, and they all follow a standard in that you can type help and get more information about all of the options available to you. If I just type word help by itself like that, I get a list of all the namespaces available currently installed in commandbox. Notice how server and commandbox are in there. We used both of those earlier. We know that server can do things like stop and start. If I type server help, I can see all the commands within the server namespace. Taking that a step farther, I can type, say, server show help, and I'll get all the documentation for the server show command, so I can learn more about what that command does specifically. This convention works for all the namespaces and commands in commandbox. Help by itself lists all the namespaces. You type a namespace like commandbox, and then the word help, and you'll see all the things inside that namespace. And namespace command help will give you all the documentation for that specific command. So commandbox would be the namespace, create would be the command, and then help on the end of it. And it gives me all the information for the commandbox create command specifically. You can also do things like tab completion in commandbox. If you're a slow typer, you can even use the tab key to help finish typing things in the namespace. So I can do things like type SER and hit my tab key, and it will automatically fill in the rest of the word server for me. I can then type STA and hit my tab key, and it will show me I have multiple options here. The start command begins with STA. So does the status command. That's a command we haven't talked about yet. If I type one more letter, STAT, and hit my tab key, you can see it will fill in status for me. And then again, of course, I can type help afterward, and it will spit out all of the help documentation for the server status command. Let's do that on commandbox, create, and tab, and look at all the commandbox things you can do. So I can type part of a keyword, and if I do tab, it will fill in the rest of that command name for me. And now you can see my cursor is completely after that command name. If I press tab again, I'll get all of those items we just saw on the screen. So these would be the options that go after create. Commandbox create app, commandbox create BDD, commandbox create unit, view, and so on. And you also get some documentation there on the right describing which each of those options do for the commandbox create command. This is all really just the tip of the iceberg with commandbox too. It really is a huge game changer in the CFML community. Even if you're not building commandbox applications, there are tons of benefits to using commandbox in your projects. Even if you're stuck on an older legacy project, having commandbox available can make things super easy. As we saw earlier, you can use it to test your code against different server versions. You can also use it for easily installing things like testbox, which is not just for commandbox applications, by the way. And you can even use it for installing non-CFML dependencies in your app, such as pulling the latest version of jQuery down from GitHub. We'll show you how to do some of that stuff later on. You can install commandbox on your development machines now and start benefiting from it during your development process immediately. Even if you haven't written a single line of commandbox code yet, I really recommend installing commandbox on any machine that you use to write code. You will find ways to benefit from it in all of your applications.